The rain was relentless, hammering against the windows of Lydia's office as she stared out at the city below. It had been another grueling day of meetings, deadlines, and the quiet but persistent hum of responsibility at 52. Lydia was a woman who commanded respect. As the CFO of a thriving tech company, she had built a reputation for precision, pragmatism, and unwavering professionalism. The youngest of 4 siblings, she'd always been the one to shoulder responsibility, a trait that had followed her into adulthood. Her 2 children were grown, her divorce long finalized, and while she loved her independence, there were nights when the silence of her home felt heavier than she cared to admit. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Michael, the new CEO, tall, broad-shouldered, and with an easy confidence. He had joined the company 6 months ago, shaking up the culture with his hands-on approach and unexpected warmth, unlike her previous bosses who had kept their distance. Michael made a point of knowing everyone, taking time to learn their strengths and challenges. Lydia respected him. He was sharp and thoughtful, and though she hated to admit it, incredibly attractive. His salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes had not gone unnoticed, even if she'd buried that observation beneath layers of professionalism. "Lydia," he began, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Can I steal you for dinner? We need to strategize for the board meeting, and I'd prefer somewhere without fluorescent lighting." His smile was easy, but there was a glint of something else in his eyes, an invitation to step outside the roles they inhabited from 9 to 5. Lydia hesitated, her instincts tugging her in 2 directions, but before she could overthink it, she nodded. "Let me grab my coat." They ended up at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of the city, a place Lydia wouldn't have chosen for herself but immediately appreciated. The warm lighting, the soft hum of conversation, and the rich aroma of garlic and basil created a cocoon that felt miles away from the sterile walls of the office. Michael held her chair as she sat, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and disarming. As the evening unfolded, their conversation moved seamlessly from work to life. Michael spoke of his teenage daughters, his love for sailing, and the recent loss of his wife after a long illness. His openness surprised Lydia, and she found herself sharing more than she intended about her marriage, the strain of balancing motherhood with ambition, and the quiet ache of wanting something more. The night stretched on, their laughter growing, freer with each glass of wine. Lydia was struck by how easy it was to talk to him, how his presence felt at once calming and exhilarating. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on hers, the way his voice softened when he asked her about her dreams beyond the confines of spreadsheets and budgets. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as a mother, a boss, or a colleague, but as a woman. It was raining again as they left the restaurant, the streetlights casting a golden glow on the slick pavement. Michael insisted on walking her to her car, his umbrella barely shielding them both from the downpour. As they reached her door, she turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. His expression had shifted, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something deep, more intense. "Lydia," he began, his voice low tonight, reminding me of something I'd almost forgotten, that there's more to life than the roles we play. Her heart pounded as he stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until it was almost unbearable. When his lips brushed against hers, it was tentative at first, a question waiting to be answered. She answered without hesitation, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat as she kissed him back. The following weeks were a whirlwind, their connection, forged over years of mutual respect and sharpened in a single evening, deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They stole moments between meetings, their conversations laced with a mix of professionalism and barely concealed longing. Outside of work, they discovered a shared love of literature. Jazz and a quiet morning were spent walking through the park, but their relationship was not without its challenges. Office politics loomed large, and Lydia worried about how their colleagues might perceive her and whether her accomplishments would be overshadowed by whispers of favoritism. The turning point came during a particularly contentious board meeting when Michael defended a proposal. Lydia had championed his words, cutting through the room with a conviction that left no room for doubt. Later, as they sat together in his office, the tension of the day still thick in the air, he turned to her with a seriousness that took her breath away. "Lydia, I don't want to hide what we have. Not from the world, not from ourselves. You mean too much to me to let fear dictate our story." With every passing day, Lydia felt herself opening up to the possibility of happiness, not the kind that came from achievements or accolades, but the kind that came from sharing her life with someone who saw her for exactly who she was. In the end, their love story was not about grand gestures or dramatic twists, but about the quiet, steady way they chose each other every day. It was a reminder that love, no matter how late it arrived, had the power to transform, to heal, and to ignite a spark that could illuminate even the darkest corners of the heart. The rain was a relentless curtain that night, pressing against the windows of the small Italian restaurant where Michael and I sat, the golden glow of streetlights bleeding through the glass in shimmering streaks. It had been a long day, one of those grueling stretches of meetings and deadlines that had become the rhythm of my life at 52. As CFO, I'd built a world of precision and control, a fortress of responsibility that stretched back to my childhood as the youngest of four, always the one to step up when others faltered. My kids were grown, my divorce a distant memory, and though I cherished my independence, there were nights when the silence of my empty apartment settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. That evening, when Michael knocked on my office door and suggested dinner, I didn't expect it to be anything more than a strategy session for the board meeting. But as the rain fell and our conversation drifted from spreadsheets to the quiet corners of our lives, I found myself learning lessons I hadn't known I needed: truths about risk, vulnerability, love, partnership, and happiness that would reshape me in ways I'd never imagined. The first lesson came in the form of a nudge to step beyond the familiar, to let go of the reins. I gripped so tightly. I almost turned him down that night. My instincts, sharpened by years of self-reliance, whispered that I should retreat to my apartment, let the rain be my shield, and sink into the solitude I'd mastered. But there was something in Michael's voice, a warmth in his easy smile and the glint of his blue eyes, that pulled me out of my hesitation. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my coat, and we ended up in that cozy restaurant, its soft lighting and rich aromas wrapping around us like a refuge from the storm. If I'd said no, I'd have missed it all. The way he spoke of his daughters with a father's pride, the stories of sailing that lit up his face, the unexpected ease of sharing my own struggles over a glass of wine. That single choice, that yes instead of no, cracked open a door I'd kept shut for years. Life, I realized, doesn't wait for permission. It offers chances in the guise of disruptions, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk through them. That night taught me to loosen my grip on routine, to let the rain lead me somewhere new, because the unexpected can bloom into something beautiful if we let it. Then there was the lesson of vulnerability, of being seen beyond the roles I'd worn like armor. For so long, I'd been Lydia, the CFO, the mother, the fixer titles that defined me, that kept me safe in their clarity. Michael didn't settle for that version of me. As we sat across from each other, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background, he spoke of his wife's illness and passing with a rawness that caught me off guard, his voice steady but heavy with loss. He asked about my dreams, not the ones tied to budgets or boardrooms, but the ones I'd buried beneath years of responsibility. And I answered haltingly at first, then freely telling him about my marriage's slow unraveling, the guilt of chasing ambition while raising my kids, the quiet ache of wanting more than the life I'd built. His eyes held mine, not with judgment, but with a kind of recognition. And for the first time in years, I felt stripped bare, not as a professional or a parent, but as a woman, flawed and alive. That vulnerability, that willingness to let him see me, built a bridge between us I hadn't known I craved. It taught me that connection doesn't come from perfection, it comes from the messy, honest moments we dare to share, and that letting someone in can light up the parts of us we've kept in shadow. Love, I learned, doesn't bow to time or expectation. It arrives when it's ready, and its timing is perfect even when it feels late. At 52, I'd convinced myself that romance was a chapter I'd closed, a story for younger hearts, not for a woman with a career carved from discipline and a life already full of its own chapters. But that kiss in the rain, when Michael walked me to my car and the space between us dissolved into something electric, proved me wrong. It was tentative at first, a question in the brush of his lips, and then certain as I pulled him closer, the downpour soaking us both. What began that night grew into stolen glances in the office, mornings spent walking through the park, evenings lost in jazz and literature. It wasn't without its thorns. Office politics cast long shadows, and I wrestled with fears that my achievements would be reduced to whispers of favoritism. But Michael's words after that tense board meeting, when he defended my work with unwavering conviction and later told me, "You mean too much to me to let fear dictate our story," silenced those doubts. Love, I realized, doesn't care about the calendar. It finds you when you're ready to be found, and it's worth every risk. That lesson unshackled me from the idea that my years were a barrier, showing me they were a foundation for something deeper, something real. Partnership, too, revealed itself as a strength I hadn't fully known. I'd spent my life carrying burdens alone, raising my children through sleepless nights, climbing the corporate ladder with grit and precision, proving myself in rooms where I was often the only woman. But with Michael, I found a different kind of resilience, one forged in tandem. During that board meeting, when he stood by my proposal with a force that turned heads, I felt a support I hadn't realized I'd been missing, not just as a colleague, but as a partner. Outside the office, it was in the quiet moments cooking dinner together, his hand steadying mine at my daughter's wedding, that I saw how we bolstered each other. We faced challenges, from navigating workplace scrutiny to balancing our new reality, but we faced them together. That taught me that strength isn't just solitary endurance. It's the courage to lean on someone, to let them lift you as you lift them. And that shared load makes the journey not just bearable, but richer. Finally, I learned that happiness isn't a prize to be won, it's a choice, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Our love wasn't made of sweeping gestures. It was in the way Michael's laughter filled my kitchen as we fumbled through recipes, the sound of waves crashing on a weekend getaway as we dreamed aloud, the warmth of his presence beside me through life's small triumphs and trials. For years, I'd measured my worth by titles and accomplishments, chasing a satisfaction that always seemed one step ahead. But with him, I found a joy that didn't demand proof. It was in the quiet, steady way we chose each other, day after day. That night in the rain, and every moment since, showed me that happiness isn't a destination. It's a garden you tend, a life you build with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and stays. Now, as I lie beside him, the city lights painting soft shadows across my room, I think back to that rainy night and feel a quiet gratitude. My life, once so tightly controlled, had veered into uncharted territory, and I welcomed it. These lessons of stepping into the unknown, bearing my soul, embracing love's timing, finding strength in partnership, and choosing joy wove themselves into me, softening the edges I'd honed over decades. The rain still falls outside sometimes, a steady rhythm against the glass, but it no longer feels like a burden. It's a reminder that even in the storm, there's beauty waiting, a promise that life, with all its twists, can still surprise you with something worth holding close.